want to move on to a topic that you are very well known for. It's about race and reparations. And I think is a question that I've kind of thought over was, how important is it to think about our past, including the past we don't particularly like, but at the same time acknowledging that we're thinking about the past, can we actually move forward as well at the same time and acknowledge what we've learned from the past without being like too focused on the past, if that makes sense?
So it's a really good question. And I think any budding historians out there will know that I remember when I was at doing A-levels and I did general studies, there was a question on the paper which was, who's more important, the engineer or the historian? And when you first read the question, well, the engineer, obviously. They build bridges, they build buildings, the engines, the things that keep a modern society going. But actually, hidden in that question is to make us think about the role of the historian, the role of history. And history reminds us of the mistakes we've made in the past, the things that we've done, and how we've got to where we are. And history is a great explainer for why we have a political system we do. Why am I living in a cardboard box at the moment? Or why is there racism? Or why is there sexism? And what are the arguments for that? And history helps explain that. It looks at the long game, the long view, politically and economically. So history is really important. So understanding our history helps us understand our present. And if you can understand our present, that helps you move into the future. So it's really critical that we have that. Now, one of the things about reparations is what reparations isn't about, from my perspective. And I think it's really important to say reparations are about repairing the damage of the past. And it's not about making people feel guilty. It's not about rubbing something in someone's face. It's not about making people who haven't really benefited from something pay something out. It's not just about money. It's not just about an apology. It's a whole collection of things. And if I'm honest, there are some people in the reparation campaign who are calling for things that I don't agree with. So it's different things, different people, but I can talk to it from my perspective. And reparations is basically about understanding that we tell ourselves certain stories about who we are. And a lot of that came out during Brexit. It's a kind of British exceptionism, that we're different, that actually it doesn't make a difference what the experts or economists say. We're British. We won't. I know we find ourselves poorer, partly as a result because of Brexit. So it's about kind of understanding that there has been for a long time a notion of what the British Empire did. I'll give you an explanation. I was talking about reparations and someone said to me, well, are you seriously going to sit there, Clive, and tell me that Britain did not help contribute to making the India that we see today because it built the railway system in India? And I said, well, it's a complex answer, okay? But here, let me try and unpack it. Of course, Britain helped build the railway system in India. And India has that railway system as a result and the economic benefits of that. But why did Britain build the railway system? Britain built the railway system in India to extract trillions of pounds worth of goods and raw resources from India to them and around the world. That's what it was built for. So yes, we can see that the train infrastructure in India has benefited India, but that wasn't why it was built by the British. It was built by the British to extract from that country to the tune of trillions, according to many Indian economists, whilst it was part of the British Empire. So history is complicated, and it gives you a picture which isn't so simple to say Britain helped these countries develop, Britain did this. Well, it also took a lot from them. So it's nuanced. But understanding that gives you an idea about why things are as they are today. So lots of people argue about the issue of structural racism. Is it real? Isn't? Well, if you look at history, it was, because to be able to ensure that the British Empire and slavery were able to function and operate, you had to have a hierarchy of human beings, and you had the pseudoscience of race. We all know anthropologically and archaeologically and biologically that there is only one race, and that's the human race. We know that. We know that we all started in Africa and we migrated out and branched off. But in the 19th century, scientists decided that you had to have some people who could take more suffering than others. And so there was a hierarchy of race that was created. So understanding these things begins to let you understand why we have racism today, why we have problems today, why people are more likely to die, more likely to be in poorer jobs, more likely to live in poorer housing, to breathe poorer air, all of those things. So the past is exceptionally important in understanding where we are today and then being able to work out how we solve some of those problems in the future. Now, the reparations campaign that I'm involved with is for predominantly the Caribbean, and it's about the fact that, under the British in the Caribbean and the islands that Britain controlled, hundreds of millions of slaves were taken from Africa and enslaved and taken to the Americas and the Caribbean and all over the empire. And the Caribbean generated, it's estimated, trillions of pounds in today's money through a very brutal process where, for example, the average life expectancy of most of the slaves was around about 10 years. So you were slowly starved to death and worked to death. Little gems like the fact that we know the Nazis used the model of slavery, the dehumanization process that took place of British slaves. We know that they used that as a model for the concentration camps. So there's a whole history out there that we don't talk about, we don't know about, the fact that trillions of pounds were taken from these countries. And people say, well, that's a past, get over it, leave it behind. But if you go to the Caribbean, which is where my dad is from, if you go to the Caribbean, you will see some of the poorest countries in the world. Now, these are countries that have built Britain up. We talk about the stock exchange. Where did that stock come from originally? It came from the slave trade. And so what you're seeing are countries who are in desperate poverty with rising sea levels and a climate crisis. We don't know how it's going to affect rain in those countries, how it's going to affect weather patterns, and they're completely unprepared for that. And so reparations is about basically saying, if we are the country that we tell ourselves we are, then surely in the interest of social and economic justice, that there should be some kind of repair and reparations for these countries who suffered so much. We wiped out the indigenous people on those islands. There were 3 million indigenous people on the islands of the Caribbean when the British, French and Spanish got there. There were around about 300,000 when they left. We know millions of people died in that period. And it's about basically saying, acknowledging that, apologizing for it. And then when you apologize, anyone knows in a relationship, when you apologize, you're open to listening to what the other side actually wants you to do. And I think that's where I think I'd like to get the reparations campaign to.
I see. And I mean, I was just in Hawaii, and that has a very, very, it's not directly related to the British. I mean, it is with Captain Cook coming onto the islands and pretty much massacring the Hawaiian indigenous people. We're still feeling the ramifications today. And when I was there, I had a class, I call it the communist class, just because I had a very, very radical professor there. And I was told that a white person cannot experience racism. I can only experience discrimination. So based upon your experience and your viewpoints, what do you think the difference is between the two? Because racism is a tribal issue at the heart of it. Do you think it's a tribal issue? And how do you differentiate the two?
So racist. Obviously, look, you go back throughout time, throughout history, and you will see they didn't. So in the Roman world, they didn't have racism. They didn't have the pseudo-scientific categorization of humans. You had civilized and barbarian, Roman and barbarian, basically. So that's why you're able to have, black Caesars. We know that Septimus Severus, I believe, was a North African, dark-skinned Caesar. The Romans didn't have the concept, well, he's black, he can't be our Caesar. This person was capable, he was a Roman. So they had a different concept of who was in and who was out. What we have is something based on the 19th century kind of pseudoscience of who's in and who's out. But I don't agree with... So racism is very complex. And, do I think that a white Jewish person can experience racism? Yes, I do, because anti-Semitism is a form of racism. It's not the same as the kind of anti-black racism that I might experience, but it is a form of racism, and it is as equal and as debilitating as anything I might face for a Jewish person. It might be different. It might have different impacts and affect my life in different ways. But so does sexism. So does homophobia. So does transphobia. But it affects people in different ways. And so does being poor. It affects you in different ways. So we know that there's class issues. So people applying for certain jobs, trying to do certain things, will be held back because of where they were born, or the school they went to, or the estate they came from. So we all face different types of discrimination. Is the person who is discriminated for being working class or coming from a bad estate, is that experience any worse or any more or any less than someone who has the same experience of going for a job and not getting it because they're black? At the end of the day, you both lose out. You both feel disempowered. you both end up in a poorer job or whatever it is that happens to you. But there are different experiences. So it's really complicated. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't be afraid of that complexity, taking it head on. It's when you get the kind of demagogues and the populists who will tell you that they will tell you what it's about. It's about these people getting one up on you, these people taking away your rights. Having these trans people, they're going to affect this on you. It's going to mean you're going to have less space in a women's refuge and so on and so forth. It's playing people off against each other. It's gone on throughout history. But I think, life is complex and it's complicated. And I don't think we should be afraid of embracing that and looking at it and seeing it as it is. So to say that white people can't feel the same... To say that a white person experience racism, well, we've already said there are some white people that would experience racism through the form of anti-Semitism, for example, or perhaps even Islamophobia. You can be a white Muslim. If you wear a headscarf, you're experiencing a form of racism and Islamophobia. So, yeah, it's complex and complicated. Just coming back and pivoting to reparations, one of the things for me as an MP in a predominantly white city is that the vast majority of my constituents have not benefited from empire and slavery. And I'm not standing up saying that my constituents should be paying more taxes for money to go to the Caribbean. It's not what I'm saying. Funnily enough, my constituents have been paying their taxes to the slave owners who were paid... Sorry about that.
All good.
My constituents were paying, as you were, if you were paying tax, maybe you weren't. But if you were paying tax up until 2015, you were paying the interest of the loan that the British state took out in the 1830s to pay off the slave owners. And we took out a loan. The British state took out billions of pounds, hundreds of billions of pounds to pay not the slaves, but the slave owners. And that's where a lot of the reparations campaign is looking at. We've got it in black and white, the people that benefited. So the things that we should be talking about should be wealth taxes. And the corporations and individuals that have benefited significantly from this, they should be paying more in tax. Now, the vast majority of those wealth taxes should be spent on rebuilding our NHS, rebuilding our public services, making sure our country is a fairer place. It only takes a small fraction of that wealth tax to go back and do the right thing in the Caribbean, which is what I'm campaigning for.